Why would the Heritage Department send you media lines and questions and answers if you're functioning at an arm's length?
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. What do you get when you cross the CRTC and the online censorship bill?
Some really ticked off conservatives, as we will see as we take a look at a meeting of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage.
Let's take a look.
So we begin with the Conservatives, Ms. Thomas, Rachel Thomas, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. Missy Trudees, thank you for being with us here today. We've been looking forward to having you at the table, and it's taken a little while to finally coordinate this, so we appreciate your time. During the debate during Bill C-11, as you're aware, there was great conversation with regards to user-generated content and whether or not it was scoped in. The government tried to insist that it wasn't. What I note, however, is that in their directive to the CRTC, they've had to make that explicit. So they've made the distinction or they've distinguished for you that user-generated content is not to be regulated. Now, if that's already not in the legislation, why would that distinction need to be made in your directive?
Thank you for the question. I would say that we know that user-generated content is out. That is clear to us. I can't speak to why something was in a directive or not.
Okay, but if it's not in the legislation, why does that need to be a specific directive given to you?
We do have clarity at the CRTC that user-generated content is not within scope, but I couldn't speak to why it was spelled out in a directive.
Do you not feel that you could have interpreted the legislation without that directive?
I will turn things over to our head of broadcasting to speak a little bit further about that.
Okay, so here we go. We're off to the races. For those of you who don't know who Rachel Thomas is, she is a firecracker. You don't mess with her. She did get in a little bit of hot water recently by asking Pablo Rodriguez to speak in English as a result of answering a question in committee. Probably wasn't a great idea for her to do that.
No, because Canadians under law are permitted to use the language of their choice, English or French.
Right, and in committee hearings, you always have, the translators translating into English or into French, depending on who's talking. So,
I mean, you may be able to ask if somebody would speak in your preferred language, but you are not permitted to demand.
Yeah. So, anyhow. The point is she can be very direct, and that's what you need when you're dealing with the corruption that's going on right now. Now, you may be asking, who is 𝘨𝘳𝘐𝘮𝘕? Well, she is the Chief Executive Officer of the CRTC, which is the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission. These are the people that regulate everything to do with broadcasting, and now Liberals want them to regulate everything to do with the internet. So this all surrounds a question that Rachel brought up about regulating user-generated content. If you recall, back when Bill C-11, the online censorship bill, was going through debate, there was great concern brought up by Pierre and the Conservatives about the fact that the government was going to regulate the content that people are putting on these social media platforms. And the government was saying, we don't care. We don't care if a cat photo is put up there. We don't care that Canadians want to put up photos of their animals and whatnot. And Pierre made the point, we're not talking about cat photos here. We're talking about Canadians that are putting up news stories, Canadians that are putting up political podcasts like ours.
Like Northern Perspective.
And Canadians that are putting up, maybe poetry, whatever, DIY videos, whatever you want. And the concern was that when this law goes through, that YouTube is going to be forced to essentially only regard Canadian content as what the CRTC tells them Canadian content is.
What will change is that instead of having algorithms that give people things they want to see, there will be algorithms that give people things the government wants them to see.
That won't preclude people from being able to find Northern Perspective, but you will have to search for it. You're not going to just be able to go on YouTube and have YouTube show you that by default. Because what the government wants YouTube to do is show you the content that the CRTC tells them to show you. So this is where all of this comes into play. And this whole podcast and social media regulation, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Facebook, whatever.
Having a directive from government is absolutely within the purview of the government. Because we're arm's length, we don't engage in a long dialogue with them about our understanding of the Act. We received the Act, we interpreted it when we received it. The government has fulfilled its, or used its power to give us greater clarity. Whether or not we already had realized some of those things or not is something the government wouldn't be aware of because we're arm's length. The government felt that there would be usefulness in giving us greater clarity about the Act. We've received it, and certainly we will apply it in the spirit in which it was intended.
So I understand what you're saying here today, and of course, you're going to take that position. I find it very interesting, as do many Canadian creators, that the government tried to insist that user-generated content was not scoped in within the legislation, but then needed to give a directive to the CRTC with regard to that end. That actually suggests that it is, in fact, within the framework of the legislation, hence the need for the directive. Nevertheless, you also mentioned that you function at an arm's length. Your mandate letter says, quote, the independence of the CRTC, along with the transparency of its processes, will be of the highest importance. However, there is a page on the CRTC's website titled Myths and Misconceptions. And when I read it, it is verbatim the talking points from the minister's office, the talking points that he used over and over and over again in the House of Commons and right here at this committee table. So I'm curious as to who authorized the publishing of the Myths and Facts page.
So this is the page that Rachel Thomas is talking about. And we've shown this on one of our previous Bill C-11 videos, but we'll show it again because it has been a while. So this is a page on the CRTC that goes over, different potential misinformation, misunderstanding of Bill C-11. So, for example, you see here, myth, the CRTC will regulate social media users and user content. Fact, we will only regulate broadcasters, broadcasting services, and online streaming services that make programming available to the public. And that's very interesting because it says broadcasters, broadcasting services, and online streaming services that make programming available to the public. So that's something you really need to remember, that that's what they're saying, because this is something that will come up later in the hearing.
And I wanted to address another thing that Rachel Thomas said. She keeps harping on the difference between what's written in the bill and the fact that the CRTC was given a directive by the government. Why this is significant is because the government has been telling everybody, oh, it's not going to affect users. It's not going to affect social media users who are posting things to their timeline, or YouTubers like us who are posting things to our timeline. It only affects the companies, essentially Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, etc. But the problem is, and this is what Rachel is pointing out, is that is not written in the bill. However, it was given to the CRTC as a directive. Now, why is that significant? The fact that it is not in the bill, that it is not written in the bill, that user-generated content is exempt from this law, but the directive was given to the CRTC, means that the government could change that at any point in time with zero notice, and they can do it like...
And this was one of the main critiques from the Conservatives, is the fact that this bill is so vague that it gives the CRTC a broad spectrum in which they can operate in regulation. So they could interpret the bill to mean virtually anything they want, and they could get a directive from the government saying anything they want. And the point is that the Conservatives were also trying to get into the bill the fact that the user-generated content would not be subject to the regulation by the CRTC, and the Liberals refused to do that. But yet right after that, they're issuing a directive to the CRTC saying this isn't about user-generated content. Well, if you'd put it in the bill, that wouldn't have been necessary.
And the reason they didn't put it in the bill is because bills are harder to change. They could say whatever they want to the CRTC. They could decide tomorrow that they want user-generated content to fall under this scope because it's not written in the bill. If it was written in the bill very explicitly that user-generated content is not part of this bill, they would have to go to a vote in the House of Commons. Well, first they would have to create a bill to amend it, and then they would have to go to a vote in the House of Commons to change it. And then it would have to go through, it's 3 readings and then up to the Senate, and it would have to go through the whole process to amend it. But because it's not in the bill, they can tell the CRTC what they want anytime they want, and it could be changed as fast as they want. And there's no oversight from the other MPs in the House of Commons.
And these bills take years to navigate through the House of Commons and the Senate, especially in a minority government.
So I can briefly speak to that and can turn things over to our head of broadcasting. We are an independent quasi-judicial tribunal.
I'm just curious who authorized the publication of that page.
So we are independent. The CRTC.
I understand. I'm just curious who authorized it.
The CRTC did draft those myths and facts in order to provide some clarity for Canadians in terms of what was going to happen with the implementation of the legislation. So that is something that was drafted by and approved by the CRTC.
Okay. Ms. 𝘱𝑒𝑡𝑠, as the head of that organization, did you authorize it?
I did.
Okay. Thank you.
Wow, we got a straight answer. It took a while. Who authorized the publishing of that? Oh, well, we're independent. Yeah, who authorized it? Well, who authorized it? Well, it was drafted by the CRTC. Did you authorize it? Yes.
Well, you know what? At least we did get an answer, which is not something we usually get in committee.
Yeah, at least we didn't get, well, that's not my job. So progress. We'll take progress wherever we can get it, folks.
That was simple. I'm now curious because I have this OPQ in front of me, which is an access to information that members of Parliament, of course, can submit. And in it, one of the question that was asked by my colleague, Mr. Shields, was what type of communication took place between the department and the CRTC? And one of the things that went from the department over to the CRTC was, quote, media lines and questions and answers. That doesn't speak of independence. Why would the Heritage Department send you media lines and questions and answers if you're functioning at an arm's length?
Wow, that's very significant.
Very, 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 very significant. If they're supposed to be an independent body, why is the government, why is the Heritage Minister sending you points that you should be reading when questioned by the media?
That would be like the Heritage Minister sending us points to be read when we're speaking. Like it makes no sense.
So I can tell you with full certainty that we absolutely are independent. I do know that our communications team sometimes does share some communications information, not for comment, but just for information.
This lady has a terrible poker face. You can tell when she gets a question that she is just like, oh, crap. And you can tell because this big smile comes across her face, like she's trying to grit her teeth, like, I can say we're independent. Why didn't anyone prepare me for that question? Maybe the Heritage Minister should have sent her some media talking points on that.
Okay, but questions and answers. Could you not come up with those on your own if you're supposed to be functioning independent?
Again, I can't speak to exactly what was shared, but the communications teams do sometimes share some communications information for information.
Okay, so not exactly independent. One of the things that is said by the CRTC is that content and digital creators will not be regulated. Of course, on September 29th, out came a podcast registry. Now, I understand that you will try to lead this committee to believe that you are not actually regulating podcasters, but rather the platforms. But what's interesting is that podcasters rely on those platforms in order to get their podcasts out. And of course, by regulating the platforms, those that use them are in fact regulated. For example, if a bookstore is mandated that they can only sell red books, that doesn't impact the publishers. The publishers aren't being regulated. In fact, they are, because of course, if they publish a blue book, its sales are going nowhere. A green book, its sales are going nowhere. So in looking after the platform or mandating things to the platform, you are in fact mandating those that are producing content. Is that not true?
Yes, it is, Rachel. 100%. And this is what many YouTube creators have been saying for the past year. And this is why everyone has been jumping up and down saying, this is a problem, a huge problem. But they come back and say, well, we're not regulating the content creators, just the platform that they use. Hello? It's pretty simple.
Well, and the other thing they've been saying is, oh, we're not going to affect your ability to share these things, but you're affecting the audience. Again, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound?
Was there even a tree there in the first place? Nobody would even know. And that's the point.
And I'll be very clear with this, we are not regulating individual podcasts. We are not regulating podcast content, and we are not regulating podcast creators.
Sure, I understand that you're not doing that directly, but you are doing it indirectly, and it's a distinction without a difference. We'll leave it there.
We're independent. This is just gaslighting, and it's funny because she's obviously not used to lying. Because she's so terrible at it. And I'm sure we're not the only people that have that opinion.
So if there's time to respond to that, perhaps I could explain what that decision did, which, okay, thank you, which was ask that large platforms provide basic information like contact information with respect to their services, and that would include podcasts. And that is the extent of it. So I wouldn't say that it's that we are regulating in that
Why
space.
are you asking for registration?
I'm sorry, your time is up. Oh, no, sorry, you have a minute. I'm sorry, I didn't see the one there. Pardon?
Don't.
Pardon?
6 minutes.
Sorry. Okay, sorry, I think you've gone over time. I wasn't paying a lot of attention to the stopwatch.
Way to go, Chair. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. You know, I wasn't doing my one job.
My one job that I get paid extra for.
Right? $13,000, folks. And she can't even do the job of looking at the timer.